Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Talk, a podcast where Amit and I talk about various topics related to technology. Today, we're going to start by asking you guys a question. Do you have a will? Do you have an arrangement of what will happen to everything after you pass away? It's certainly a thought-provoking question. And we want to look at this area of we want to look at the digital side of this area. We all have, seeing as you guys are listening to our podcast, we all have digital presence on the internet and in various other places offline as well, which might be digital. And all of these presence creates content and assets on the internet and in digital realm. And we want to talk about the digital legacy that you will leave behind when you finally pass away. So this is quite a thought-provoking topic to talk about. When Amit came up with the topic, I was actually quite interested because there is a lot to talk about, and it's quite thought-provoking in a way that a lot of the things that we may not even we may have not even thought about, we can explore those in this talk. Digital legacy. It's in a nutshell, digital legacy is all the legacy you leave behind digitally, as the name suggests. And as soon as you start thinking about it, you probably start thinking with your Facebook account. But it's not just limited to that. It's not just the content you create, although that is a major part of it. There will be a lot of other types of things that you may or may not have, like, for example, your Bitcoin or NFTs that you own. So it's a very interesting topic. Hope you guys will stay with us while we explore this area. Amit, what's your thought on digital legacy?
So thanks Rinat for that introduction. I think it's a very apt topic because we have so many logins these days. We have social media accounts, shopping accounts, bank accounts, and we manage everything online. And it's crucial to think about what happens to these accounts when we die, when we become paralyzed, when we become incapacitated in or handicapped or whatever. So what happens to these accounts? How are these accounts managed? What happens to the information that's there in the account? Do they get lost forever? What does Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, what do they do with these accounts? Do they have any policies, etc.? And that's what digital legacies are all about. When we talk about legacies, in olden times, it used to be about how much wealth you're leaving behind in terms of financial assets, how much property you're leaving behind, how much money you're leaving behind for your children, how many houses, properties, etc. So those are the kind of things that you used to normally put in your will, and that used to be the legacy that you leave behind for your family, for your children. You used to have insurance, so as part of your will, you would write your insurance details. So what happens to the money? How does it get paid, etc., etc. But no one talks about, okay, who will manage my Instagram profile, or who will manage my Facebook profile, or what happens to all the emails in my Gmail account, or Yahoo account, or Hotmail account. So no one talks about that. And then what happens to the money in my bank account? So what happens to that? I mean, I manage it online. So what happens to all those things? And that is something that companies have already started thinking about. And that's what we want to explore in this talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I actually, thought about what will happen to my online content and accounts quite a few years ago. And I did some research, I think 5, 6 years ago. And at that time, I read an article where the journalist actually probed, if you like, all the different major platforms like Microsoft, Facebook, Gmail, and they found Microsoft to be the most to have the most sort of structured or sort of response team who actually thought about it, and they had a process in place. although the others didn't even think about at that time. Obviously, nowadays it's a lot different because your Facebook account has become an asset in itself, because it's not just the relationships you manage over there, it's your content, and you might have a business side of it. You might manage a page or two which might have subscribers which are generating money. So there are assets involved in all different major platforms like Instagram, Facebook, as well as your Gmail and Microsoft free email account, which you might be thinking, yeah, not much, but there is a lot of sister products of Microsoft that maybe you haven't thought about. For example, Xbox. Maybe you're a gamer and you have coins or some sort of assets in those games in Xbox. In your Xbox account, you might have your bank details and the rest. With subscriptions, and then you could also have a PR account with Facebook. I mean, there are so many things that each of these companies own. For example, Facebook owns WhatsApp and Instagram, which both could have business accounts. And then they also own the Oculus Rift, the virtual reality profile. Microsoft has similar sort of range of products that you might be separately connected to, but not thought about that they are all under one account. So it's good in a way that your loved ones might not have to go through all the different accounts, but it's still important to know that what's happening. And nowadays you can sort of nominate or tell these companies about what should happen to your account after you pass away. So there are now structured business processes in place by these businesses. But then again, now they're in place with all of these major platforms. But then, you might have smaller accounts with smaller companies, which doesn't have these things sorted. So it's a very interesting thing to explore. What would you want? I mean, before we, I think before this digital age, I think the norm was that make everything cash, and then divide it up in according to what you say in your will. But nowadays not all of them can be made to cash, because in an Instagram account with a lot of followership, you might actually not want them to be sold away, but to be managed by your inheritance, so they can continue to leverage the followership from that account. So it's quite powerful thought to sort of explore.
Definitely, and you touched upon very finer aspects. You touched about NFTs, you touched about monetization from Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts, and that's actually such an important thing because a lot of people like us. I mean, we started doing this podcast almost 2 years back, and I mean, and we've still not generating any revenue from it, but there are a lot of people who generate revenue from the content that they create, and that revenue is actually running their families when they're alive. But what happens to that revenue once they get incapacitated or die or whatever? So I think it's very important to define all those things and then put it in a trust or a will or etc. But when I say put it in a will, what do we actually mean? So say I have a Facebook account. Put in will what? Am I putting the username? Am I putting the password? And then, okay, so suppose I put the username and password. So do I want my, say, son to manage my personal Facebook account on my behalf? Is that right? So then, if that's not right, then what should be the next step? Okay, so what should happen with my Facebook account? Should it get deactivated? Because normally what happens is if you don't use an account for some time, say a year, then it gets deactivated, and then you have to go through a process of getting the account reactivated. And I think after 2 years it gets deleted because there's no point for the company to store your data if you're not accessing it for the 2 years. So do you deactivate your account? Do you delete your account? Or do you just memorialize it? So there is this whole term of memorialization where you actually create a memorial. So you keep the account active, but it's now a memorial in memory of Amit Sarkar. My Instagram page will be there. People can access it, but it will show a sign saying that yes, I'm no longer alive. or I'm no longer able to control this account, etc. And that's a very important, and so these are the kind of questions that the companies are now thinking, and they have already provided such features on their platforms.
Yeah, I remember back when Facebook was, there was a lot of controversy around Facebook not ever deleting, you're not being ever able to delete a Facebook profile. And then there was I think I read a meme somewhere that in 50 or 100 years' time, there'll be more Facebook profiles of dead people than alive ones. And it's an interesting thought. And yeah, what you mentioned is in, as a memorial, and in different ways you can preserve or not preserve. And it's a controversial and moral question, like what would you rather like, and is it okay for your loved ones who are the closest to you, but yet still you might have content, information, messages in your Facebook or other personal messaging services that you don't want them to see, but you also want the other aspects of, say, for example, you don't want them to see your Facebook messages, but you do want them to manage your Facebook pages, which are, have a large followership. So what happens in these scenarios? Can you actually pick and choose which ones to be deleted and which ones to be transferred? Can it be transferred? Can a page ownership be transferred to a different account? And should it be that kind of, that's an interesting thing to explore.
I think page ownership can be transferred, but I think profile ownership may not be. And if you, so there is a process now in place, because the thing is, when we are talking about digital assets, all these digital assets are protected by passwords or some kind of authentication mechanism. So now the question is, when you define your will, do you give the passwords to all your loved ones?
That's quite interesting. I actually thought about it quite a few years ago. I started thinking about it quite a long time ago, and I thought that okay, I want to have I do want something to be happening with my accounts. I have my OneNote with a lot of notes, and some of them has direction of what could happen. So I want at least my loved one to have my Microsoft password. That way they can, at least I could detail everything I want to happen in OneNote, but they could access the OneNote with my password. So as long as I can get them the password. But nowadays, with two-factor authorization and other security measures in place, just having the password is not enough. And also, for good reason as well, for security purposes, just the password shouldn't really, I mean, when the account is owned by you, the service provider, for example, Google or Microsoft, should know who is accessing it, because it has your bank cards and other payment details as well. So from a security perspective, if in case you're not dead, no one should be able to just do everything that you would do. So say, for example, even if you give your loved one your password and they gets in and then they transfers all the money from your bank account to their bank account, but then after some time it's realized that you had debts, but the debts don't transfer as you die, it goes with you. So what if a malicious person added debt to your account, and it could become quite complicated. So in that sense, even your loved ones shouldn't be allowed to transfer money from your account to another account. But if they have your password, they might. And what do you do in this scenario?
So that's what a will or a trust is, because it's supposed to enforce your wishes. So when you are, so you write a will and you define all the assets that you have, digital as well as physical assets and financial assets, whatever. So you define all the lists of all the assets. Then you define, okay, what asset should be distributed and how it should be distributed. Okay, so if you are saying that, okay, I have a house, I want the house to go to my son, and I have say 300,000 cash, I want that cash to go to my wife, and then I have my Facebook account, I want my Facebook account to be kept active, but it should be memorialized. So these are the kind of things that I would define in a will. And when whoever executes the will then make sure that it's executed based on my wishes. So I think the onus of how the information should be used always lies on you. And that's what the legacy is all about, right? So suppose I don't create a legacy, okay, and I don't share any passwords. In that case, what should my, say, wife or son do? So in that case, what they'll do is they'll try to approach Facebook, they'll try to approach Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and what they'll do is they'll request them to maybe deactivate, maybe delete, or because I have not defined anything, or they can decide, okay, memorialize it. But for them to take such action, they would need to provide some kind of necessary information like proof of identity, proof of death, proof of incapacitation, etc. So that way, Facebook and Google, Microsoft, all these big players, they can identify that yes, that person has now been left incapacitated, and they have died, and they have proved that they are the closed ones, they are the closest members to this person, and based on their request we are dealing with this, because there is no will. So there is no legal basis for them to carry out any of these transactions. So that's how they can do and take ownership of the account. And that's why it's important to define a will right now, because we don't know what will happen. And if you are not sure about these things, banks can take ownership of all your financial assets if you're not announcing the nominees, if you're not announcing what happens to, say, your shopping cart, to your cryptocurrencies, to your OneDrive and Google Drive photographs. So normally a lot of people, Dropbox, they have a lot of photographs. What happens to those photos? Who does it go to?
And those are valuable memories to
Exactly.
your loved ones, but maybe nothing to Microsoft. So they would be happy to delete them and save their space, while those are really valuable photos to your loved ones.
Yes.
So it's important, absolutely important, to define what you would like for everything to happen. And this actually hits close to home for me quite a bit. Amit, when you came up with the topic, I immediately thought about my younger brother. He passed away very recently, to just over a year ago. And there was nothing defined because he is younger than me, and so I mean, it is quite sad for me to even communicate with all of these companies. So I haven't yet. It is in my to-do list, but I haven't even started yet because to get the documentation that proves my relationship with my brother and the fact that he did in fact pass away, all of this documentation is quite lengthy. And once I have that, then I can communicate with them and do anything that I would like to. So right now, his profiles are there just as it is, not logged in and not managed or not memorialized, and it is quite important. That's why I would urge even more strongly to our audience that it is important to at least define what will happen to your digital accounts, assets, and everything, including content, so your loved one can take care of those after you pass away. And it is important to your loved ones as well to be able to do that, and that is from my own personal experience.
Yeah, Renat, it was very unfortunate. Um, I mean, it was very unfortunate when you lost your brother. But I think you're right. I mean, we never know what will happen in life. I mean, we have parents, right? Parents also now have digital assets, and we don't know, have they defined anything for us, or for our, I mean, for each other. So it's, I think the main reason for doing this talk is basically to create that awareness that these things are something that people are now thinking about. So like Instagram profile, you're so popular and suddenly you die. What happens to all your followers? What happens to all the advertisements that you are showing through your platform, and all the brands that you connect? What happens to all of that? And people have now started thinking about it. So there is something called as every company has a different name to it. So like Google has inactive account manager, Facebook has something, and Apple has something. But they have now clear defined policies. And as part of this podcast, what we'll do is we'll share those links so you can have access to those, and you can actually go and check. Okay, so what do I do with my Instagram? What do I do with my Facebook? And what do I do with my Google account? And imagine if you're using Google account, you're using Maps, you're using Gmail, you're using YouTube, you are using Google Drive, you're using so many other things just from Google. And if you're on the Apple ecosystem, you have the Apple TV, Apple Plus. What happens to all your subscriptions, by the way? So have you thought about that?
So yeah, I mean, speaking of subscription and streaming services, this actually reminds me of quite appropriate situation that happened very recently. For those of you who are gamers, a very popular gaming streamer, I think his name was Technoblade.
Yes, he passed away very recently.
Passed away in cancer, and he actually did have a lot of things set up. He had a pass away message for his dad to convey after he passed away, and that's a good example of thinking ahead even past your time of passing, and how to take care of all of these. I mean, definitely do. I would urge the audience to check out this story. I think if you search Technoblade, even if you're not a gamer, you would know that he was a streamer. He was a very popular streamer. A lot of people were his fan, and I'm not a gamer at all. But even I somehow, got this news that this happened and who he was, etc. So that's definitely something to think about and something to take action to. I mean, here we, Amit and I, we do talk about topics every week, and at the end we always urge you to do something. We do. I mean, we're not trying to convince you to do this way or that way, but we do urge you to be aware and do something about that topic. And in this topic, I think it's important that. We ask you that you guys do something about what will happen to your legacy when you pass away, and potentially use Technoblade as an example. And one other thing as well. This is from my personal experience from my brother. Which I learned is that if you have iPhone, which he did, iPhone PIN numbers are not you can't avail it from anywhere. If you know it and if you pass away, that's it. So it's not saved in the cloud, it's not anywhere, and you can't sort of recover the phone in some way, even if you take it to a tech person or even Apple. Even they would not be able to unlock your phone if you don't know your iPhone passcode. So that's very important if you want your phone to be available after you pass away. There might be important data, information, photos, memories in your phone, or the phone might be an expensive one, which you might want people to have. If it is an iPhone, you do want to make sure that your Apple PIN code phone PIN code is somehow available after you pass away. So yeah, Technoblade is what I wanted to sort of bring up. It was a really good example of what should happen to your digital legacy. And if you are, an influencer of any sort, that's a good example to look at.
Yeah, I think it's even I mean, you compared Apple, but Android also has the same feature. So when you actually create the pin, the pin is always stored locally. It's never transmitted to the Google servers. So it's on device encryption that happens with the pin. So even Google can't unlock your phone. So it applies the same to Android ecosystem as well. But I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have to do some more research, and we'll provide the links in the description about how Google manages smartphones. Because I mean, we talked about digital assets like your subscriptions, your social media profiles, your shopping accounts, your bank accounts, etc., etc. But the most important asset, which is not digital but it interacts a lot digitally, is your smartphone. What happens to your smartphone? How do you unlock it? And I mean, we are talking about creating all the list, but in the end, they are all secured by a password. So, do we want through the will to share passwords as well? So, you might want to share passwords for some accounts, but how do you share passwords? I mean, do you write it somewhere? Do you have a file? You protect it, and then that file has a password, etc.
But this just immediately rings alarm bells that it's a security risk, because if all the passwords are protected with one password, that in itself is. And if
But
you write it down, it's just absolutely not advisable to write down ever your password. So what actually do you do, Amit? I do wonder.
so I mean, you have heard of password managers, right? And you might be using a password manager. I use an offline password manager called KeyPass. I recently created a video for it. I'll share the link. And basically, I manage all my passwords in a single database and I store it on my local machine. And because it's protected by one single password, and that password is a very long password, you cannot easily hack it. It's a long password. It's not a password. It's a passphrase. So it's very important that you understand the difference between a word and a phrase and how easily it is to hack something. But
But
yeah, go ahead.
so just to sort of challenge you on this, I mean, I don't think they're, the hacking, the actual being a tech wizard and hacking your password with brute force or any other a very clever method is the reason passwords get fail passwords fail. It's because as human, it always 99% of the time it happens because of human error. No matter how difficult, long, or complicated the password is, it's because of human error that most of the time someone gets their account. So what would you do in that scenario? Because yeah, as you said, I also use a password manager. Mine's even less secure because mine's just Chrome.
Okay.
So what would happen if someone gets my Gmail password? I made it. I put it unrelated to me, very complicated, all of those things. But I could make an error one day. You know.
Yeah. So to deal with that, firstly you have to understand why a password manager exists. So yes, people reuse their passwords. People use the same passwords. People use a combination of a certain password, and maybe they have three or four different combinations of the same password they use across multiple websites, and they have like tons of logins. You have logins for insurance, you have login for bank, you have logins for social media, logins for shopping, login for cinemas, login for theaters, login for so many things. Okay, and all these logins should have a password based on a certain criteria. Some have special characters, some have don't have special characters, some have uppercase, lowercase, etc. And it's hard to remember everything. A password manager comes because it can create a password for you on the fly that you don't have to remember. That's the first thing. Now, you're right. A password manager is protected by a single password. That's the case for both offline as well as online. So the only way to secure that is through a passphrase, a very long password, not a password passphrase. So it's almost like the length of a sentence, maybe 100 characters, but it's easy to remember. So the password could be I love Amit Sarkar a lot, and then some numbers. So I love Amit Sarkar a lot is a sentence in itself, but because it's so long, the processing power that we currently have will not be able to hack it in the near future. So now what happens is that these password managers are there, and you make a human error, and because of that your password gets leaked. It has leaked. So we interviewed Troy Hunt in one of our podcasts. He maintains a website called Have I Been Pwned? And if you type your email there, it'll tell you in which database all the passwords have leaked. So now that password that has leaked is online. And what has happened, and it has happened to me, LinkedIn passwords got leaked, and those LinkedIn passwords with that password, and unfortunately I was reusing those passwords in some other accounts, and the hackers, they were smart enough to try that same password with my email on those accounts. Now here's the trick. Have you heard of two-factor authentication? So that's tied to your phone, and that's how you make sure that just having a password does not compromise your account. Maybe we'll do another talk about two-factor authentication because that's a very important topic as well.
Yeah, yes.
But the whole idea is that you don't have just a password to access your account. You have some kind of an SMS code, some kind of a on mobile token
Mm.
that's generated, or you have a physical key that you have to press or connect in your device that gives you access to your account. And that is the crucial bit that you have to be always careful about. Because if you have two-factor authentication, even if you make an error, people cannot get into your account that easily. They'll need your
Mhm.
smartphone. They'll need that physical key. Otherwise, they'll not have access to your account. Even if you make an error, even if the password gets leaked, even if it is online, hosted on a cloud server, you're still safe. So I think, I mean, we'll
So
do another
this
talk.
actually, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of going a little bit off
Yes.
topic, but we're going to bring it back exactly like this because that's essentially the challenge when with your digital legacy is because two-factor authorization you need the access to your phone, and you want to ensure that not only do you share your password but also give access to your phone to your loved ones. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to access. We encourage using two-factor authorization in all aspects, absolutely very much do, because it is more secure and it is the most secure way of protecting your information and content online. But at the same time, you also want to, if you want to give whichever access to your loved ones after you pass away, um, you have to remember that not just giving them the password, just giving them the password won't be enough for them to have access to everything that you have. And a lot of the times you only have accounts through a mobile app and you don't potentially use it on websites, a login on websites. Many accounts are only based on only mobile based. For example, TikTok is, yeah, you can go on TikTok with a web browser, but most of its activities are on mobile phone. And if you have a large followership and there might be money coming in or whatever, then you might want that to take into consideration when you are making a list of all the things that your loved ones should have access to.
Yes, and it's not just TikTok. I mean, a lot of the times what happens these days is we have facial recognition and we have biometrics enabled. So what happens is we forget the password. So even if you write down the password and it's protected by some kind of biometrics, and we recently did a talk on biometrics as well. I think so. You have to think about all these things when you are defining your digital legacy. How would people access the information that you have so carefully protected? And what kind of information are you willing to share with them when you pass on or pass away?
And who will be the executor? For example,
Yes.
like platforms like Facebook or Google or Microsoft, they have so many different areas where you might have access, contents and information for example, the example we had talked about earlier, you might want your Facebook pages to transfer ownership or other content you want your loved ones to have access to, but you don't want your Facebook messages to be revealed for whatever reason. Then someone has to go into your Facebook account and delete all the messages before the access is given to your loved ones. So who would be the executor? Because in a traditional sense, there is usually an executor for your assets. When you die, you have different investments, properties, etc. So there is an administrator or executor who does all of these things and then transfers it over as per your intention, as you intended, to your loved ones. But then there might be a need for an executor in the digital world, and who or what will do that, because each individual platforms, they're not going to take responsibility for the other platforms. So Microsoft is not going to do anything to do with Gmail or Google services. So there needs to be an independent executor who will take care of all of these platforms on your behalf. So how does that work? And is there a service available right now that you could pay that there will be the executor of your digital content in future?
So normally what happens is people have family lawyers and they execute the will, and the lawyer is mostly from a firm. So if the lawyer passes away or he moves away, then they can bring in some other lawyer, and that's an impartial person, a third person that he or she is not related to anyone from your family, and that person is an impartial executor of your will. It could be the will, trust, or whatever. But the whole idea is that when you define your will, you define it in front of a solicitor. So the wording is exactly correct, because sometimes what happens is the wordings can be reinterpreted or interpreted in a completely different manner. So you have to make sure that if you make it very simple, so it cannot be read in multiple ways or understood in multiple ways, or you write it from a legal point of view, or you ask a legal person to write your will, and then you verify it and you sign it. And on the day when you die, or based on whether you become paralyzed or incapacitated, then the lawyer again can come to your family. You can have a meeting, and you can then, that person will execute the will. First the will be read out to everyone, and then it will be executed. So that's the normal way of execution. And you can find lawyers who write wills, and then lawyers who can maintain the will for you and then execute. And we'll share some links as well for that. But yeah, normally this is how it's done. You are not going to leave the will uh, with some of your family members. You might leave the will to a friend, because you're not going to transfer ownership of. You might, if the friend is very close, and if you don't have any other uh, relations close to you, then you might transfer some assets to your friend, because he has taken very good care of you and you're very close to him or her. But normally it goes to the family. And if it goes to the family, then you can have your friend as an impartial executor as well. So yeah, these are the main ways you can do it. But I would always urge to go properly and do the legal way. So if you have a family lawyer, talk to that person and make sure, because they are bound by confidentiality as well, so they cannot share the content of the will with anyone in the family.
So I don't know if this makes sense, but while talking about it, I just thought about, the reason cryptocurrency or the blockchain became so popular is because something that was quite private before, it was questioned, what's the need for the master ledger to be private? Why can't it be public and validated by everyone? So of course, in your will, or as you leave your legacy, your password should absolutely be private, because then what's the point? But the distribution of what should happen, is there a need for that to be private? What if it was always public, written somewhere, what you want right now? And it's just the execution part, the access part when you pass away, the handing over of the password, that happens when you pass away. But everything that you wanted, you already written it in a blog post, for example, and it's always publicly available. Say, for example, I want, my children to have this many percentage, and my wife, and all of these things. I've already, say, for example, not that I have, but if someone already have it, they know they have it publicly written, so it can be validated, but so no one can basically change the story after I die either. So that wow, what do you think of that idea? It's just something that just came up. Hopefully, an audience will make that into a reality. If they don't find any if it's not a stupid idea.
So
But
let's be paranoid for a bit, okay? So I have a will. I write the will, and I put it in an envelope, and then I seal it with a wax, and then I put a seal on the wax with a date, and I destroy the seal. Okay, so no one can forge it. Okay, so that's in the physical world. In order for me to do the same thing digitally, I need to ensure that the digital will is not forged in any other way by any other person. So how do you enforce that? So that's where blockchain comes. Blockchain is not about decentralization or keeping everything public. Blockchain is to make sure, if something is digital, how do you ensure that if it is copied, what is the original version? So it keeps a track of multiple copies.
you know what the original one is.
Exactly.
So,
And
so
that's
identifying the
that's
original is
that's the
blockchain.
NFT as well, right? So the
So can
blockchain
you
enables you to keep track of the changes that have been made to the original document. And That
Right.
way.
So can I make my will an NFT and etch it in Ethereum network
It's
or
it's it's
Polygon?
it's it's a good concept. Maybe we should discuss a
Because
business idea about that.
yeah, absolutely. This is absolutely amazing. You know what we can do, Amit? We have many topics to talk about in future as well. But I have a list of various ideas, tech-related ideas that I just written down as ideas, but I don't think I'll ever come around to making them a reality. So in some of those episodes, I can actually go through some of the ideas I have. But okay, that's for another conversation. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't actually mind if anyone from our audience takes this as an idea, creates a company. I don't even need credit; just make it a reality, and it would be good for humanity. I will take it as that.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's an interesting premise because you're right. We all have physical wills, and everything is moving online. So how do we convert a will to an online version? So what if we have an online will? How do we ensure that it is not tampered with, it is not changed, it is not modified? And the one way to do it is having a blockchain. You can have a Ethereum blockchain using a smart contract. You can have a Bitcoin blockchain. You can have any kind of blockchain and put it there so you ensure that okay, it survives. Now the problem is again these decentralized networks sometimes they die. They become a flop
yeah,
show.
of
So then
course.
what happens to that
That
information?
that is there is definitely that risk, but then obviously it's a $1 billion industry. NFT, I think I don't think it reached trillion yet, but yeah, NFT, the whole industry is $1 trillion, $1 billion, and thousands and tens of thousands of people working on it. So I mean, obviously, there's always a chance it can die, but if you choose one of the most more popular ones, more established ones like Ethereum network, or Polygon has now become quite established as well, I hear, then there is less chance of it to die. And also, I mean, if you were really paranoid of it, you can be a miner and download the whole of
The
the
blockchain.
history, the whole of the blockchain in your computer, and there is way to get information out of that as well. So it's not like that information has to completely die away outside of your control. You can still preserve the information, but if the network dies, your validation by the rest of the world dies with it. But that's on a very unlikely scenario. I mean, the banks could also collapse tomorrow, or a government in a country could collapse tomorrow. I mean, I think it's that level of unlikely scenario for Ethereum network to die as well. But one of the things I just thought about a few minutes ago, I'm trying to think about, is yeah. So this is from my personal scenario. As my brother passed away, I mean, it is for me. It's too sad to go to Facebook now and fight with them to prove what he wanted, because I don't have a solid proof of what his intentions were. I know we talked about various things, and I know that. But how do I prove it and give me access to? But if he had publicly, declared things that he would want, there won't be any proof needed because it's publicly declared. He, as the owner, he etched it in Ethereum or some sort of blockchain. So that would be easier for the loved ones to access and maintain and action all the things that anyone wanted, because everyone knows about it, and people would, I would think, usually be helpful to keep a deceased person's last wishes.
I think Facebook does have an option, so just go online and check because they will give you an option to first prove your relationship with the person, then prove
Mhm.
that that person has passed away, and based on the death certificate, and then you can decide what you want to do. And I think they will take that into account if there is no formal will, because of course you have to bear in mind that not everyone is aware that a will should be there in the first place. I mean,
Mhm.
we are talking on a podcast where I mean we are not sure how many people are listening to, but say about 0.001% of the population is listening to this podcast. That's a very few number. So a majority of them are not even aware outside this podcast and see how many people are actually constantly searching for a will. So a lot of the times, a lot of the poor people and everyone, so we are actually talking about a very niche population who have access to digital assets, who have a smartphone, who bank online, and who have such things which needs to be protected.
Or
So
create digital content as well.
yes, exactly,
I
exactly.
mean, you might not have a lot of these other things, online banking or whatever, but you might actually create digital contents in
Yes, yeah.
remote parts of the world as well. So
And then
yeah,
you're generating revenue from Google ads or whatever. So yeah, so it's important to think about all these things, and I'm pretty sure companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, they are all thinking about these things because you're right. I mean, what happens to the bank card that I've saved in the Amazon account? Who removes it? And what happens to the yearly subscription cost that happens on my OneDrive account? Every year, some money gets deducted from my bank account. What happens to that? Who reports to the credit agency that okay, I've passed away, so stop reporting or creating bad debt? Who stops reporting to the credit collection services who are trying to collect debt from you because you have not paid certain credit cards, etc., or certain loans? So how do you ensure all these things happen? So I think companies are thinking about it because what happened is we had only physical assets. With the advent of internet, with the advent of smartphone, everything is moving slowly online, and especially with COVID, we are now talking to people and doing things just online. We don't, I mean, except for groceries and maybe few other things, everything, most of the work that we do is knowledge work. It's not physical work. So if it is knowledge work, it's always done online. And if it is online, it means it's digital. And if it is digital, it means it needs to be protected, it needs to be passed on, it needs to be, I mean, there has to be a way to pass it on to the next generation once you pass, just like a physical asset. And a lot of companies have started thinking about it. You can actually download all the data from Google. If you want to say delete your account, you can download all the data, and Google will send you GBs of files which you can download, and then you can keep it on your computer. So yeah, there are many things. I mean, we just talked about digital assets. Think about all the hard drives that you have. If you have encrypted it, what happens to those hard drives?
yeah, and on the other side of it, if you didn't encrypt and you wouldn't like anyone else to see, what happens to them? Those content in your hard drive, which are offline, and you think that it's there not online and it's all good, but what happens to
Then it
those?
should be in a locker.
So yeah, I mean, if you want to keep a hard drive, external hard drive in a vault in a locker, that's another story. But yeah, I mean, these are important questions to think about. So I mean, we're not coming up to you guys with a solution, with a like a coherent solution. But what we are urging you guys to do is to think about it and take some sort of action. I mean, if at the very least you could go through that Facebook settings where you at least nominate someone of and when you try to do that, then a lot of thought will come to you that okay, this also needs to happen or not, and things like that. So yeah, it's thought provoking and also action provoking. Hopefully, that you would take some action. It doesn't have to be a very detailed, a very like a comprehensive list of things that you have to do or take care of, or a list of passwords, but do something or start by doing something and then see where you end up. But it's definitely something to keep in your mind.
Definitely, and thank you so much for listening, everyone. It was a great conversation, Renat. I think we covered a lot of important things, and I hope the listeners and the viewers who are watching this video take away something and try implementing some part of it in their lives, because I think it is very important. If you care about your loved ones, you would think about these things, and you would make sure that it's done properly so that it doesn't end up in a feud or in a fight or something like that, or a court case. So you don't want that to happen. So you want everything to be sorted before you pass on, before you pass away, so that things are taken care of. So yeah, thanks again for tuning in, and hope to see you guys for the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, guys. See you later.